Okay, so you want to own a cruise ship. Picture it for a moment. 14 decks, 2,000 cabins, 11 restaurants, 4 swimming pools, a casino, a theater, a rock climbing wall, and a medical center. It sails to the Bahamas on Monday, docks in Cozumel on Thursday, and returns to Miami by Sunday with 4,000 paying passengers who each handed you somewhere between $500 and $5,000 for the week. It sounds like a machine that prints money. It is not. Before that ship earns its first dollar, before a single passenger boards, before a single drink is poured at the pool bar, you have already spent somewhere between $500 million and $1.4 billion just to own it. And that number does not include what it costs to keep it moving. Let's start with what the ship actually costs to build. A new mid-size cruise ship, the kind that carries around 3,000 passengers and sits at roughly 130,000 gross tons, costs in the range of $500 million to $800 million to construct. A large modern vessel like Royal Caribbean's Icon of the Seas, which entered service in 2024 and holds approximately 7,600 passengers at full capacity, cost over $2 billion. These ships are not assembled. They are engineered. The construction process at a major European shipyard, Fincantieri in Italy, Meyer Werft in Germany, Chantier de l'Atlantique in France, takes between 2 and 3 years from keel laying to delivery. The interiors alone require custom fabrication at a scale that has no equivalent in commercial construction. Every piece of carpet, every fixture, every galley appliance, every safety system is specified, sourced, and installed to international maritime standards that do not allow shortcuts. You are not building a hotel. You are building a self-propelled vessel that must comply with maritime law, operate in international waters, survive open ocean conditions, and carry thousands of human beings safely across hundreds of miles of open sea. The engineering cost of that requirement is embedded in every dollar of the price tag. If you cannot afford a new ship, and almost no one can without institutional backing, you buy used. Second-hand cruise ships trade at significant discounts depending on age, size, and condition. A vessel built in the early 2000s with a capacity of around 2,000 passengers might sell for $50 million to $150 million on the secondary market. That sounds manageable until you account for what comes next. An older ship requires immediate investment to meet current environmental and safety standards. The discounted purchase price is often the beginning of the capital outlay, not the end of it. This is where financing enters the picture, and where cruise ship ownership stops resembling anything a private individual could realistically pursue. The major cruise lines, Carnival, Royal Caribbean, Norwegian, carry debt loads measured in the tens of billions of dollars. Carnival Corporation entered 2024 with approximately $30 billion in long-term debt. Royal Caribbean's long-term debt stood above $20 billion. These companies do not own their fleets outright. They finance new ship construction through a combination of export credit agency loans backed by European governments, private bond markets, and bank syndications that spread the risk across dozens of lenders. A typical ship financing arrangement involves a 12-year loan at rates that fluctuate with the credit market, secured against the vessel itself. The ship is both the asset and the collateral. If the revenue stops, the debt does not. The operating costs begin the moment the ship is delivered, and they do not stop. Fuel is the largest single operating expense for any cruise line. A large cruise ship burns between 80,000 and 250,000 gallons of fuel per day, depending on size and speed. At current bunker fuel prices, that translates to somewhere between 80,000 and 300,000 in daily fuel costs for a single vessel. Fleet-wide, fuel typically represents 12 to 15% of total cruise line operating expenses. When oil prices spike, that number moves faster than any pricing adjustment the cruise line can make to its ticket structure. Crew costs are the second largest line item. A large cruise ship employs between 1,500 and 2,500 crew members. Officers, engineers, and hospitality managers are drawn from maritime academies around the world and command professional wages. Entry-level crew in food service, housekeeping, and entertainment typically earn modest base salaries supplemented by gratuity revenue, but the aggregate payroll across a full crew is substantial. Add food provisioning for thousands of passengers eating 3 meals a day, plus continuous snacks and room service, and food costs alone run into the tens of millions of dollars per vessel per year. Insurance adds another layer. Cruise ships carry hull and machinery insurance, protection and indemnity coverage, and passenger liability insurance. For a modern large vessel, annual insurance premiums can reach $10 million to $20 million. Port fees are a cost that passengers rarely think about, and operators think about constantly. Every time a ship docks, it pays. Passenger head taxes, docking fees, pilotage fees, and local authority charges stack up across every itinerary stop. A ship visiting 3 Caribbean ports in a week might generate $500,000 to $1 million in port fees for that single voyage. Then there is dry dock. International maritime regulations enforced through the International Maritime Organization require cruise ships to undergo scheduled dry dock maintenance every 5 years at minimum. Dry docking involves pulling the vessel out of service, hauling it into a shipyard, inspecting and repairing the hull below the waterline, servicing the propulsion systems, and bringing all safety and mechanical systems into compliance with current standards. A full dry dock for a large cruise ship costs between $30 million and $50 million and takes 4 to 8 weeks, during which the ship earns nothing. Deferred maintenance is not an option. The regulatory framework governing cruise ships is enforced by flag state inspections, port state control authorities in every country where the ship calls, and international safety conventions that carry penalties, including detention, meaning the ship does not leave port until it passes. The cost of compliance is not negotiable. It is the price of operating in international waters. What you are looking at, in total, is an asset that costs over $1 billion to build, requires hundreds of millions in debt financing to acquire, burns through operating costs at a pace that would bankrupt most businesses within months, and demands a continuous cycle of expensive regulatory maintenance just to keep moving. The infrastructure exists. The passengers exist. The question is whether the revenue they generate actually covers any of this. That is where the economics get interesting. So where does the money actually come from? The obvious answer is ticket sales. Passengers book a cabin, pay a fare, and board the ship. That is the transaction everyone understands. It is also the least interesting part of the revenue model, and in some cases, the least profitable. Ticket prices on a major cruise line vary wildly, depending on the itinerary, the cabin category, the season, and how far in advance you book. An interior cabin on a 7-night Caribbean sailing might go for $500 per person. A suite on a premium line for the same week might run $5,000. The cruise lines have spent decades optimizing their yield management systems, filling ships the way airlines fill planes, dynamic pricing, last-minute discounts, bundled packages, with the goal of maximizing revenue per available berth. But here is the number that reframes the entire picture. Industry analysts estimate that ticket revenue covers roughly 70 to 75% of a cruise line's operating costs on its own. which means a full ship, at full fare, sailing a full itinerary, barely breaks even on the voyage before you count what passengers spend once they are on board. This is where the business model reveals itself. The ticket gets you on the ship. Everything that happens after that is margin. A passenger who boards having paid $700 for their cabin will, on average, spend an additional $200 to $400 per day on drinks, specialty dining, the casino, shore excursions, spa treatments, and the retail shops that line the interior promenade. The alcohol packages alone, which cruise lines push aggressively at the point of booking and again at embarkation, typically run $60 to $100 per person per day and carry margins that dwarf anything happening at the fuel pump. A glass of wine that costs the cruise line $3 to pour sells for $14. A specialty restaurant dinner that adds $45 per person on top of the included dining generates nearly pure profit. Casino revenue on a large ship can reach $1 million per week. The onboard economy is not an amenity. It is the business. Carnival Corporation has reported that onboard and other revenue consistently accounts for around 30% of its total revenue. On a ship carrying 4,000 passengers, that is tens of millions of dollars per voyage that has almost no marginal cost attached to it. The ship is already floating. The casino is already open. The bar staff is already scheduled. Every dollar a passenger spends on board is a dollar captured on an asset that was going to run whether they spent it or not. The math only works, however, when the ship is full. Occupancy rate is the central variable in cruise economics. The industry measures occupancy differently than a hotel does. Cruise lines calculate it based on double occupancy of every cabin, meaning 100% occupancy means 2 passengers per room. Many large ships routinely report occupancy above 100% because they place additional passengers in rooms that can accommodate 3 or 4. When occupancy drops, the economics collapse in a specific and brutal way. The fuel still burns. The crew still gets paid. The port fees still come due. The fixed cost structure of a cruise ship does not flex with passenger count. A ship at 70% occupancy is not 30% less profitable. It may be unprofitable entirely. This is why pricing strategy and seasonality are not just sales problems. They are existential questions. Caribbean sailings in January fill easily. The same ship repositioning to Alaska in October does not. The cruise lines manage this through continuous itinerary adjustments, aggressive promotional pricing to fill weak departure dates, and repositioning voyages that move ships between seasonal markets. But every discount offered to fill a cabin is a permanent reduction in per-voyage yield. Scale is the answer the major cruise lines found to this problem. A ship carrying 7,000 passengers spreads its fixed operating costs across roughly twice as many revenue-generating passengers as a ship carrying 3,500. The fuel cost per passenger drops. The crew cost per passenger drops. The port fee per passenger drops. Every fixed cost in the operating structure becomes more manageable when you divide it by a larger number. This is why the cruise industry has spent the last 2 decades building larger and larger ships. Royal Caribbean's Icon of the Seas is not just an engineering achievement. It is a unit economics argument. When your daily operating cost for a vessel approaches $1 million, having 7,000 passengers each spending $300 a day on board produces very different math than 2,000 passengers doing the same. But scale cuts both ways when something goes wrong. A ship that goes idle is not a neutral event. It is a daily cash burn with no offsetting revenue. The pandemic demonstrated this with a clarity no business school case study could match. When global cruising halted in 2020, the major cruise lines were paying full operating costs to keep ships anchored in port. Carnival burned through approximately $500 million per month during the shutdown. Royal Caribbean was spending $250 million to $300 million a month just to keep its fleet stationary. Neither company was generating meaningful revenue. Both were servicing tens of billions in debt. It took 3 years and an extraordinary amount of additional borrowing for the industry to recover to pre-pandemic occupancy and revenue levels. Beyond pandemics, the risks are persistent. A fuel price spike that moves bunker costs up 20% hits every ship in the fleet simultaneously with no ability to hedge quickly. A single high-profile incident, a grounding, a norovirus outbreak, a casualty, can suppress bookings fleet-wide for a year. The reputational fragility of the business is baked into the product. People are buying a vacation. The moment the experience becomes associated with risk or discomfort in the public mind, the bookings soften before the operational problem is even resolved. Owning a cruise ship makes economic sense under a narrow set of conditions. You need scale. You need high and consistent occupancy. You need onboard revenue streams that extract hundreds of dollars per passenger beyond the ticket. And you need the financial resilience to absorb the intervals when none of those conditions hold. When all of it works, the cruise industry generates returns that justify the capital. When any part of it breaks, the fixed cost structure turns the asset into a liability at a speed that is genuinely alarming. The vacation looks like a bargain from the outside. The economics behind it are anything but. This is not a leisure business that happens to involve ships. It is a highly leveraged, scale-dependent, operationally complex industry that uses the promise of relaxation to move one of the most expensive physical assets in commercial existence. The next time you see a cruise ship in port, you're not looking at a floating hotel. You're looking at a billion-dollar bet that enough people will order the drinks package to make the whole thing work.